Hello, welcome to Eastview Conversations, the first in a series of book talks with editors and authors in the field of Slavic and Eurasian studies. I am Larry Boguslaw, editor-in-chief of Eastview Press, and the publication we're going to talk about today is our newest book called From Words to War, Ukraine and the Russian Press, 2014 to 2022. This book was compiled by myself and my editing team here at Eastview. With me today to ask questions about the book is Dr. Artyom Tonoyan, visiting professor of global studies at Hamline University, St. Paul, Minnesota. And Artyom himself is the editor of a compilation called Black Garden Aflame about the Nagorno-Karabakh conflict, and that came out also from Eastview Press in 2021. Artyom, thank you so much for joining us.
My pleasure, Larry. Looking forward to the conversation.
What was the first question on your mind that you wanted to ask about the book?
Well, as with any books, I would like to know about the biography of the book. How did it come about? Who were the parents? Uh, what is what was the process? How did it come
the
about?
progeny and the process.
What prompted the book?
Well, to answer that question, I have to give credit to Eastview CEO Kent Lee. It was his brainchild was to ask the question, what were they thinking? Behind this tongue-in-cheek expression is a real question that was on the minds of many researchers who had been studying the Soviet Union and Russia and post-Soviet space for decades. What was the Kremlin thinking? What was the rationale for invading Ukraine? What was the motivation, strategy behind it? And was there even a strategy? So to answer the question, we drew from a source that we put out at Eastview every week on the average. It's called the Current Digest of the Russian Press. And it is a collection of articles from a variety of media sources, both print and online, and from all over the political spectrum. And as you can imagine, there were hundreds and hundreds of articles about Ukraine over the years. So the piece of time that we chose was started with February 2014 during the Maidan protests in Kiev, and ended with just about 8 years later, February 24th, 2022, when Russia announced its decision to invade Ukraine, calling the action a special military operation, of course. So those are the years that we chose from the archives of the Current Digest of the Russian Press.
The other question that I was thinking about, maybe you could elaborate on this. What was the selection criterion? I mean, we sort of know, those of us, especially in the academia that keep an eye on developments, political developments in Russia, in Ukraine, in the region, in the Caucasus, and so on and so forth. We sort of have a good knowledge about the thinking that happens in the halls of power in these regions. But what interests me as someone who's a sociologist and who's interested in how ideas that are first, elaborate among the elites, how do they make it down to the hoi polloi, the regular people, those that the elites want to influence and want to lead. So, having said that, predicated, uh, what were the selection criteria for these articles?
Well, that's a really interesting question. Because we do have articles that are all over the political spectrum, including a healthy dose of opposition articles, for the purposes of this book, where we wanted to show that uh, the mindset of those in power and what they were publishing for the average Russian person, as opposed to the critically thinking Slavic researcher located wherever in the world. We focused on readings that reflected the the mainstream media, so the middle of the road and pro-Russian publications like Российская газета, Независимая газета for events on the ground, Коммерсант, Известия, those type of publications are what dominates here. And there's there's just a some targeted selection of opposition commentators who are basically reacting to and taking a critical view of the mainstream view, just to give a little bit of balance. But if you look at the book overall, it is dominated by the by the authorities' point of view. And we also included some meta text on both sides of that equation. Uh, First, we have an intro that that tries to put all of these events and viewpoints and statements in historical context and give an idea of what events were influencing uh, various articles and speeches that came out. And we also have uh, an appendix that includes primary sources, speeches and articles by Putin, by Foreign Minister Lavrov, and there's a piece by Dmitry Medvedev as well. And the reason for including these primary sources is that the secondary sources in the media are often commenting on what these people have said or written. So it puts that in a greater context.
Now, when I was formulating my question and listening to your answer, I was thinking, what would you tell people that would say, why is your publication, why is your press bringing these voices that we know from the get-go are sort of uh, propaganda voices? These are not experts who are neutral or at least claim to be neutral, but they are peddling a certain narrative and they are operating from within a certain viewpoint. And why bring these voices that are by and large delegitimized in the West to your audiences? What is the reason? Is there any positive, net positive? Are you contributing to the official Russian narrative and so on and so forth? I'm playing as a devil's advocate here.
Of course.
What
And
would you say to those critical voices?
yeah, you're touching on an issue that has occupied academics for many years, and I'd probably say for many generations, about um, basically what points of view are legitimate and worthy of paying attention to, worthy of studying. And the American media, there are a lot of good things to say about it, uh, about about our sources that we draw on. But as you said, the um, the Russian point of view of propaganda has been delegitimized in the West, and quite successfully so, to the point that not only the mainstream reader, but even some portion of academics think that it's not worth listening to the Russian point of view anymore, because it is so hateful to us. It Those sources themselves denigrate the West. They denigrate the American government. They denigrate Western coalitions and make accusations. Some of them justified, some of them unjustified. So it's a really good question. Why should we listen to them? But I believe, as somebody who was trained as an academic, that it is really important to keep track of what everybody is saying, including the ones that hate you, that hate me, that hate the West, uh, because we we need to know the evidence that they're citing, whether it's fabricated evidence or not, the facts that they're citing, whether they're real facts or not. It is not only important, but it's crucial for us as academics to keep track of what they were saying. And in this case, I believe that if if we in the West had been paying more attention to what was being said about us during the late 2010s and early 2020s, we would not have been so blindsided by the actions of the Russian government in 2022.
Mm. I was thinking, when I was putting my book together, one of the operating questions in my mind was, what am I trying to accomplish? I remember when I was in graduate school and working on my dissertation, there is always this quest to find information, to cite, uh, make sure you don't miss sources that are important, and so on and so forth. And when I was in graduate school, a lot of the time, when it came to working with sources in languages other than English, students always made the excuse, oh, I don't speak Russian, or I don't speak French, or I don't speak Armenian, so I cannot make use of these sources. And uh, essentially, what you end up doing is excluding these important sources of information. I was thinking when I was putting the book together was to essentially make sure the students that come after me will not have the same excuse as the students that came before me and were students during my own graduate years. So, in that regard, I think the articles that you have collected and translated for the book provides some very important service for future generation of scholars, area studies, Russian studies, Slavic studies, who are emerging, maybe do not have the command of the language as much as we would like them to have, or as much as you as a professional translator would like to for these students to have. But I think it's a great service that the book exists, and it should become the go-to place for non-Russophone speakers to call information from the horse's mouth, a horse the size of Russia. But let's talk about
It's a very large horse.
yeah, it's quite a large horse. I don't think a stable can fit that horse. Um, let's talk about some of the most interesting articles that you came across. I know when I was perusing through the book, when I was going through the book. By the way, shameless plug, if you don't buy the book for the content, buy it for the cover, because the cover photo was taken by yours truly. I took the photo when I traveled to Izium, the fall of 2022, when Izium was just retaken by the Ukrainian army.
Yeah, you
Um,
you you took some amazing photos from that
thank you.
trip.
Thank you. And I'm glad at least one of them made to the book. And the question I had when I was going through some of the articles, one of them that really caught my eye was an article authored by none other than Yevgeny Primakov, a former foreign minister, an academician, a member of the Russian Academy of Sciences, former foreign minister, an Arabist by training, who has been compared not for nothing with the likes of Henry Kissinger, someone that I don't like, but who has cast an enormous shadow in our understanding of global affairs.
Very much so.
Yeah, so the article for me was very interesting because for a couple of reasons, but one of the biggest reasons it was interesting to me was that I had always thought of Primakov to be this measured, calm, cool head who, had this incredible presence whenever he walked into the room. Much like Kissinger, he could suck the air out of the room when he entered it, but nevertheless, he had that presence. And all of a sudden,
Indeed.
I read that for some reason I had missed this article. in its original form when it came out in Russia. But it was interesting for me to see him not quite parroting the official propaganda and not quite enthusiastically embracing it. But at the same time, it looks like he has embraced it and internalized it and is now making the case the only way he can make and putting his, um diplomatic reputational imprimatur on the Russian
Exactly.
government's
Exactly.
arguments
The
about the
pre
war
Mhm.
and so on and so forth. Can you talk more about that article? Because I think it's one of the most fascinating articles in the book, to be honest. Can
Thank
you talk
you.
about that?
Thank you. Yeah, I felt that we were really lucky to have spotted that article when it first came out and to have included it in the current digest. Primakov was, as you say, a giant in political studies and academia. Uh, but I would say that uh, despite his reputation as a measured, reasonable guy, I want to remind you that in March 1999, during the Clinton administration, when Primakov was on his way to meet with Al Gore in Washington, D.C., he learned, when he was on his plane, that NATO had started bombing Yugoslavia, after months of negotiations and attempts to settle that conflict diplomatically. And when he heard that, he ordered his plane to turn around so that he would not land in Washington, and he went right back to Russia. So that turnaround was a historical moment in Russian-U.S. diplomatic relations, and I believe that that he always carried that that deep, visceral sense of offense with him, for the rest of his life. And so the talking points in the article that you're talking about, which dates 2014, I would say they not only not so much parroted, but they set the tone
Mm.
for the Kremlin's Ukraine discourse. And some of these were based on facts, uh, but where he took his arguments from there, uh, um, directed the themes of Russian propaganda that would keep going for years after that and are still going today. For example, he started from the fact uh, that U.S. Congresspeople and diplomats were present at the Maidan, and they spoke with members of the opposition during the months of protests, and they came several times. And there's this image in Russian officials' mind of Victoria Nuland handing out cookies to protesters, as though that is as though that is what sustained hundreds of thousands of people to stay out on that square for week after week. But anyway, it is a fact that U.S. officials met with the opposition. But from there, uh, Primakov takes the argument that the U.S. aided and embedded Ukrainian nationalists to commit a coup d'état and to overthrow the legitimately elected president, Yanukovych. So again, I'm just communicating the propaganda line. And the argument that goes along with that the present Kiev government that was installed in 2014 was illegitimate, and also again based on the fact that Western officials came to Ukraine and witnessed the protests firsthand, that led Primakov to conclude that Ukraine was merely a tool for the West to try to contain and eventually defeat Russia. And that, of course, eventually served as a direct impetus and a direct rationalization for Russia to invade Ukraine in 2022.
Another question I have, we don't have a whole lot of time. I wish we had more time to talk about this.
Mhm.
Um, I would be interested to know how the book is structured and why is it structured the way it was structured? I remember when I was putting my book together, I didn't want to have a simple chronology. Um, didn't want it to be a Chronicles of Narnia about Nagorno-Karabakh, going
Exactly.
year from year zero to whatever the year it is. But
Hmm.
I tried to organize it more along the lines of different themes that I thought emerge when I was compiling those articles. I remember reading thousands of these articles, close to 2,500 probably articles that I ended up reading, maybe 2,000, maybe 3,000, more or less,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
culling it down to about 250 articles or 300. I can't remember now exactly. But I organized it that way. How is the book organized? Uh, how is this book organized?
yeah, we actually took a cue from your book, Artyom, because we were looking at hundreds and hundreds of articles, um, all going in all different directions, all different themes. So how do we get a handle on that? And so we um, we did we started proceeding chronologically, but as we went through chronologically, we also sort of sliced the content crosswise into themes. And so what we ended up with was six thematic sections. Um, One is protests and counter protests, the Maidan movement, and the sort of counter protest of the Novorossiya movement. The second one was military provocations and preparations, because real military action, even if Russia didn't acknowledge it as a war, started going on later in 2014, and was happening at the same time as as other things. The third section was settlement talks, which again were precipitated by by military actions and protests on the ground. But the settlement talks cover the Minsk agreements and subsequent diplomatic negotiations. And then at the same time as all this is going on, there are domestic developments in Ukraine. Ukraine has a new president, Poroshenko, starting in 2014. Um, Various legislation is changed. Statements in the Constitution about Ukraine's aspirations to join the European Union and NATO, et cetera. So there's that domestic side that we also felt should be paid attention to. And then there's the international component. The fifth thematic section is Russia's relations with NATO and how Ukraine plays into that. Ukraine, of course, is not and was not a NATO member, but Ukraine's potential NATO aspirations were seen as a real threat by Russia, and other operations of NATO were perceived as a threat, and we have articles that talk about those perceptions as well. And then finally, perhaps the most important element, which we chose as the sixth section, immediately preceding the decision to invade, is the ideological preparation for war. But uh, as we implied, and when we were talking about Primakov, the ideological preparation was going on way before that, and it only acquired momentum and was more vehemently articulated in those years, in 2014 and even before that, and leading up more and more intensely through the 2020s until the invasion finally happened in February.
Another question that I have, um, again, this because I had the experience of compiling a similar book. Apart from breaking down the books along certain themes and topics, do you see any like two or three uh, main sort of thematic patterns that emerge from these that you could draw insight from when you look? broadly and deeply into this stuff, into the articles that were being written and promulgated?
Yes, definitely. There is, first of all, there's the question of nationalism,
Mm,
about the about Ukraine asserting its own identity and Russia, for its part, asserting its sort of national myth that uh, that includes Ukraine. Given that the conversion to Christianity happened in Kiev, and Russia, considers uh, modern Russia considers itself directly descended from that. So these sort of competing ideas of nationalism are at work. There's also the related to that is the emotional appeals to the Russian audience that you can see over and over in the articles that we selected about 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 nationhood and identity. And another big theme is the interpretation of history. How do you make sense of history? And and you can see, especially in the ideological component of the book, that the Russian government is working very hard to reinterpret past history to delegitimize the statehood of Ukraine and to justify a belligerent stance against it and to portray it as an existential threat.
interesting stuff.
And
And
it's
the
fascinating.
probably the last question that I have, you know, to me, a book is worth the book's important can be measured as much with what's in it as what's left out of it. I think there's an Italian historian, Carlo Ginzburg, who teaches at UCLA, has an interesting uh, an interesting stuff to say about what we keep and what we leave out. I can't remember the exact quote, but I'll revisit it with you at some point. But are there any articles that when you think back, like, dang it, I should have included this article and, or this and that. Are there any articles like that that you wish you
Well,
could have included?
yeah, we had trouble deciding about on a starting point, and originally we thought it should be the annexation of Crimea in March 2014. Then we decided to go a little further back because we wanted to get Yanukovych's ouster in there, so that dates it back to February 2014. But if I could go back again, I would even start a couple of months before that, to the Yanukovych's unexpected refusal to sign the European Union agreement. And behind that was a sort of smoking gun, an enticement in worth $15 billion of debt forgiveness and gas discounts that Putin offered Yanukovych just before that meeting in Vilnius.
Hmm.
Uh, and so luckily that information is available in the Western media if you know where to look, but I still would have gone back and set the stage for the Maidan protests, rather than sort of dropping the reader in the middle of them. And that's a really good question.
All right, I think that's as much as I wanted to learn. Um, and hopefully our listeners or viewers will draw the important conclusion that this book is a must for their library, either personal or their academic library.
Thank you, Artyom, and I appreciate you joining me to ask the right questions about this book from somebody who knows this history, and is also steeped in academia. So we invite you to explore the book further. There are excerpts on the website. There are review copies that can be ordered, also through our website, eastviewpress.com. And we invite you to, we thank you for listening to today's podcast and invite you to listening to future ones. Thank you again, Artyom,
You are
and
welcome.
thanks to all of you.
Looking forward to further conversations.
Thank you.